Hey, George.
Hey Beth, good to see you.
Good to see you. I feel like I've been so lucky this week to have you, on my screen twice. It's
Well,
like,
yeah, the same here. That's
oh.
great. Yeah.
So this is my month of purpose, October. And
Mhm.
so today we're here with George Fuller, who is one of the people that has inspired me along my path. Um, And so I'm really happy to have him with us. George is a minister, a mediator, a caregiver, and the founder of Life Compass Living, and the author of a book which is soon to come out, which is Life Compass Living, Flourishing Together.
There you go.
So George does something similar to me in that he has a framework that he helps people use to age well and feel positive about their aging experience. But he has some interesting twists that I love that are a little bit different and very appropriate for purpose. So, George, thank you so much for being
Oh,
here.
you bet. Glad to be here, Beth. Yeah.
You truly are such an inspiration for me, and I know it's can be such a long journey. It takes so much to create this idea, put it together, bring it to people, and you just are such a leader. So thank you for leading
Oh,
the
yeah.
way.
Well, you're doing the yeoman's work too, so that's great. I'm glad to be here. Really am.
So, for the month of purpose here, I'm going to ask you some questions and put you in the hot seat, just
Uh-huh.
like I do other people. And then I know that you can take anything I say and run with it as you wish. So,
Yeah.
but my first question
Mhm.
is, what has given you a sense of purpose in your life?
Um, I guess the it kind of crystallized for the first time when I was 14 years old, and I had a big crisis going on in my life,
Mm.
and I kind of came to the end of myself for the first time, um, and had, I guess, what most people would call a spiritual experience. It wasn't in a religious context. Um, it wasn't guided by a religious, agenda. But I did have this sense that I was connected to something bigger, and all the anxieties around a relationship that was in turmoil, and adolescent angst. And my dad was in Vietnam, and we hadn't gotten any contact from him for a few weeks, and so
Mm.
I had fears he was dead. He wasn't dead, but I had fears he was dead, um, and I just was falling apart, and had this sense that something bigger showed up, and ever since then, I thought I was part of something bigger, something that, really, in essence, even back then, held everything that was connected to and made everything matter and everyone matter. Um,
So, did
and
you have a sense what it was? Like you felt that you had a sense of purpose, but did you have a direction, or did you know what the purpose was at that point?
no, I think that that made me think that I was part of loving everyone, part of being good for everyone, and the big sense
Mm.
that I think most of us are conscious of, that
Wow.
we want to be the good guy in our story, the good woman in our story. Um, and then I began to participate in the Christian religion because that's where my family was. I began to um, answer the question everybody was asking: "What are you going to be when you grow up?" And I began to have different ideas on what that would be. Um, but when I think about purpose, I think that too often we answer purpose with a task
Mm.
rather than with the thing that holds all of our tasks into one theme and one story and one fulfillment. Um, and so I can say that ever since that day, I have felt fulfilled when I was helping. I have felt some contentment and value when um, I was being more myself than the person or persons, other people's expectations made of me. Um, and So it was that day. Then again, multiple times deciding on careers, because I was going to be a lawyer, then I was going to be a doctor, then I was, and I ended up being a minister, and then, on and on it goes. And so it did seem like the crystallization was that I was to use who I was and who I was becoming to serve others. Um, and thought, like a lot of people tell you, is that if you find the exact right task to do, you'll be fulfilled by the task.
Yeah.
And my experience has been that I've been fulfilled by the bigger motivation in a bunch of tasks. So I've
Mm-hmm.
been a minister, I've been a mediator, I've been a foreman on a roofing crew, and other things. And it seems that that's the one of the themes. The biggest theme is to use who you really are to help others and to heal the earth. That kind of idea. And it was weird at 14 to try to have those conversations
Mm-hmm.
when everybody who wants to shape you will tell you who you are. They'll tell you what to do. And it was, a lot of years later when I think I came to more freedom around that, and not just meeting the expectations of the people and institutions I was part of.
Well, I think so. It's so easy for us to, in our society, to just focus on the tasks, like you were saying, and the doing, because that's so visible,
Mm-hmm.
and it's something we can connect with and label.
Right.
We can put labels on those things. The job description can be, lawyer, doctor, and we can say that that's what gives me purpose. I think it is challenging if you're trying to, especially as a 14-year-old, to describe who you are and what you want to do without relying on those labels.
Right. I mean, even like, a few years later, I woke up with a lot of injuries from playing football. And I didn't give myself permission to admit that I was 135 pounds and trying to play high school football. And that really didn't make a lot of sense. But I felt compelled to be part of the high school I was part of and to play sports.
Uh-huh.
And looking back, I thought, well, who was it that made me make that, caused me to take that kind of choice, make that kind of choice, when I really had a passion for baseball and I really had a passion for basketball, but I didn't really have a passion for football.
Mm-hmm.
And I paid the biggest price for playing football, and I only did that to meet the expectations of, social pressures and peer pressure.
Um,
Um, and that's been the case many times in my life that
mm-hmm.
I woke up realizing, oh, I was fulfilling other people's expectations and utilizing the resources I had, time and energy and even money, and I was on someone else's agenda, serving something that wasn't even necessarily in the best interest of everyone else. So,
Mm-hmm.
3 times I was knocked unconscious, and now you find out that's really not a good thing. So anyway, that was just one illustration. There are
Yeah.
multiple illustrations of realizing I've invested myself in something that took my full energy and attention,
Mm-hmm.
and not really clear on how that connected to my bigger purpose and to actually the healthy utilization of my time and energy and gifts and talents. Um, and that's the way it is. A lot of people wake up. I have a friend who woke up, having given himself to a whole career in a company, and paid a huge price, um, and doesn't look back, warmly on what that
Mm-hmm.
company did with his energy and how little faithfulness they had to his care and concern as the company made
Mm-hmm.
choices to defund security and stability for their employees. And so it seems like it's a common thing for all of us. So, no guilt for any of us, just awareness, because once we become aware, we can become more true to ourselves and more true to these bigger purposes that actually serve, more of humanity, more of the good of the earth. Um, and I think that's what we were made for anyway, was to be part of what we're, a good part, a healthy part, a beneficial part of the things we participate in.
So yeah, I just want to jump on that a little bit because you've mentioned a couple times of the bigger purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm interested, how do you help people think about, the different types of ways they can find a purpose? Like, how do we discriminate? We can find purpose in a job. Sometimes
Right.
that is just a job.
That's
And
right.
that's okay too, right? We might be
Absolutely.
providing for our family or whatever. We have things going on.
Mm-hmm.
Or we may find purpose in a being an artist and solving the world's problems or providing clean water to the poor, right? Something big. So
Mm-hmm.
how do we, accept that full range of purpose and then decide for ourselves where we fall in that spectrum?
I think, first off, I'd like to say that whatever gets us there, gets us there.
Mhm.
Um, I've been sitting in the rooms of recovery and seen people who have been through some terrible stuff.
Mm,
Some of it of their own choosing, but a lot of it built on the fact that they had a very dysfunctional and non-supportive early life, and then they have some catastrophic event, and they make huge strides quickly
mm,
towards clarity on who they are and what they want and what they don't want.
mhm,
Um, and I've been jealous sitting in those rooms listening to people's stories about how quickly they got there when it seemed to have taken me decades to learn what they learned in 6 months. Um, I've had to take a path of going from being socially connected and always in leadership roles in whatever group I was in. And I couldn't get clarity till I spent a lot of time being quiet and silent,
mm,
and listening to something that was deeper than those voices could speak, that was clearer than those voices could be. And so I found that inside myself there was a resonance that I knew wasn't the noise, and a desire and a hunger and a lure, that, for lack of a better word, was just simply wasn't toxic. Uh,
mm,
when I followed that and follow that now, I I experience that I'm actually good for all that I can imagine. And I know there's plenty of things about myself in the world I can't even imagine yet because I don't know myself perfectly or the world perfectly. But when I listen to that instinct, that voice, that draw, that lure, um, it seems to have the good of good in mind for me and for everyone else. Um, and I've seen so many diverse. As a minister, I've sat and been a lot of people's confessor, where they tell their story to me. Um, and I would just like to honor everyone's path to that kind of understanding of themselves and of how they fit in the world. Um, and so some people talk about an inner passion, and it may be just the way I understand passion, and that may be mistaken or different from other people's. Um, but I wasn't as trusting of my passions as I was passion as a byproduct of following the deepest voice.
mm,
So when I would follow the deepest, what seemed to be the deepest and truest, and it grew in a passion, it was counterintuitive because sometimes I wasn't getting the outcome I wanted. And at the very moment I was not getting the outcome I wanted, how people responded and everything, there was still a passion for it. So it actually seemed to resonate more truly with who I was and who I wanted to be and how I wanted to be in the world. And
the-
and so there are a bunch of paths, but anyway, the bottom line for me is that you get to a place where you can honestly say, I'm not getting up in the morning and seeking the approval of or validation from the things that only exist outside. They also exist outside. I don't believe there's just an inner voice that isn't also the same
mhm,
voice that's happening outside. But if it's just outside, the way I would phrase it, it tends to be my ego looking for the justification to act however I please, around my more basic animalistic desires and social needs than it is being true to myself,
mm.
in the ways that I can choose. Um, and so um, that's been, one of the things that makes it clear to me that living with purpose takes work, and living at the discretion of your passions takes a lot of energy and time and money, but doesn't necessarily pay off the way we want it. And it's beautiful when the two are in the same space.
Yeah, sometimes we get lucky. Sometimes we just stumble into it. Some people have, but a lot of times we have to be very conscious about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you reminded me actually of one of my favorite quotes in Buddhism, which is abandon all hope for results.
Oh, absolutely. When you're absolutely, yeah. When we're attached to outcomes, there's no doubt, where it's all coming from. It's coming from the anxieties we have of something that does not exist. And the more
hard to do.
The more mature we are, the more secure we are, the content we are, the less we need reality to change. And the more capable we are of reality being changed in the goodness of for the goodness of everyone. Because anxious people will tend to play favorites with themselves and their tribe. Non-anxious people tend to let everyone be equal. And so that's absolutely right. You have to let go of outcomes.
So let's talk a little bit about purpose as we're aging. I know that I feel one of the gifts that I was given as I journeyed along with my mom as she was aging was to have that understanding of purpose kind of expanded and settled, because I was able to just be with her, and I wasn't actually doing anything or having tasks or accomplishing anything. But I did feel a great sense of purpose and meaning and joy, and it was a gift for me.
Right.
But how has your understanding of purpose changed as you've gotten older, or what advice do you give people who are maybe trying to find purpose or change purpose, new purpose later on in their lives?
So it's, I guess that I found out that in order to be clear on your purpose and to be faithful to the purpose, so not only to know it with some clarity, but to be faithful to it, to act and live in harmony with your purpose, is actually going to demand you know yourself better and understand the consequences of your own words and choices and consumption patterns in the world around you. And so a lot of what I think was toxic in my life was unconscious to myself and to others and to the earth. And there's a real question still in my mind as to how much work I want to do on knowing myself and understanding consequences. Because once I understood it to be toxic, it would imply that if my purpose was to be good to myself, to others, to the earth, which early on became my commitment, then I would have to change behaviors. And then when you change behaviors, there's consequences. And you have to deny some things you want. You have to go after things because they're important, not because you like going after them. You have to be willing to pay the social prices, the relationship prices of redefining yourself as a consumer or redefining yourself as a professional. And so, I kind of naively thought ministers were hired to have authentic spiritual journeys and to guide others in having an authentic spiritual journey.
They're not, George?
Well, my experience was that people did appreciate an authentic spiritual journey. So I've never, I don't think overall people would say I don't want another person, even my minister, to not have one. But it turns out that religions, like any other institution, have things you're supposed to reinforce and support and maintain. And so when I changed my mind, I caused anxiety in the communities where I was the ministers. And it turns out that if you change your mind, you can cause anxiety in your family. If you change your mind and your consumption patterns, you can cause anxiety in your friendships. And so, if I was, if anybody younger than me was listening and really wanted to have the fulfillment that I experience when I know and live in harmony with my purpose, I would tell them, like has been said, before you build that tower, make sure you're committed to finish it. And if you're not willing to discover that there are things about yourself and about how you live and speak and consume and take up the resources of the earth that are toxic, if you don't want to discover that, then you might want to avoid really knowing your purpose, because I believe there's a lot in common with everyone who found their true purpose. Everyone who finds their true purpose has some things in common with everyone else who found their true purpose.
What are those things?
So I think it's the good for ourselves and others. In the Christian tradition, you love God with all your heart, soul, body, mind, and strength, which means you give your whole self to the thing that holds everything and loves everything, because God has everything and loves everything. There's nothing but pure love in that. And you love yourself and you love others. And then it seems obvious in my tradition and even held within that statement that you don't foul the nest of the people you love, yourself or others. And so this biosphere we live in is actually something, our purpose is to maintain it and keep it well and heal it for our sake and for the sake of generations to come. And so, and if we don't have that in common, I'm willing to be wrong and willing to be criticized for being wrong about it. But I actually think people who haven't come to universal compassion lack 100% clarity on the purpose for which they exist. Because universal compassion, I think, is the purpose for which all sentient beings exist. Everybody who's conscious of the truth about their existence and the purpose for which they live will share universal compassion. So, and that may not be the case. And I wasn't thinking universal compassion when I was 14, but I remember even some, being part of a race riot that I was surprised by, and then confused by, and then, now what's going on here? What's the, why can't Elvis Bradley and I were friends and played basketball together, and he was black and I was white, and all of a sudden that wasn't supposed to happen. And I remember thinking that there was something wrong with that. And anyway, all the way to now, we put solar panels on our house, and it wasn't to save money. That was because I have grandchildren and everybody else does too. So we actually ought to try to keep the earth from going toxic. So what do you do? And what I'm discovering doesn't have to be what anybody else discovers. And I certainly discovered it late and maybe right on time by some spiritual teachers. But
so let's talk a minute about that process of discovery. And if someone is feeling a bit lost and doesn't know where to begin, do you have a couple tips for them as far as how do they start that? How do they start the process of connecting with their own purpose?
The advice I've given a lot of people, and the actual words I use to describe, would be guided by the tradition I think they're coming out of or living into. So I would use different vocabulary based on that.
You mean the religious tradition, or
religious tradition, cultural, or philosophical, or if they understand string theory, we can talk about that.
Okay.
And so you want to know the way you're connected. I would find a person, a people, a community that actually exhibits the things you feel compelled to discover and know more about, and let them teach you how to be there, how to know it.
So it's through people, it's through the relationships.
It's being mentored. I know I've been mentored by a lot of books I've read,
Mm.
Guided spiritual experiences, counselor, spiritual directors. Um, but there have always been people in my life who seem to have the kind of things I wanted to know and the kinds of relationships I wanted to have. And I let them teach me. Um, and building an individualistic, isolated, eclectic, new thing is hilarious and harmful. That there really isn't a new individual truth that someone's going to discover.
Mm.
There's only fresh, maybe more complex versions of what's always been true
Mm.
being discovered. And we might learn more of the inner workings of the universe, but there's not a new universe that we're discovering, and including myself. I'm not discovering a new George. I'm actually getting to know better the George that produced the moment I'm having, you know. And so that kind of idea, because I know some people uh, chase mindfulness individually, and I don't want to discourage chasing mindfulness, even chasing it individually. But the people who learn mindfulness the deepest usually have a teacher and a community in which they learn to practice mindfulness.
Mm.
And I'm convinced of the brain science that is showing us that people who accomplish the deepest and biggest experiences of mindfulness feel connected to everything.
Mm.
And so, if as that is true and as that unfolds, let the people who are where you see yourself going, or where you long to be, or have a beautiful life, teach you how to have a beautiful life.
What if you
And
don't have? What if you don't even have that? What if you don't even have an idea of what is beautiful to you? You can't
um,
find something that inspires you. What if you're that lost?
well, then I would say to pick a tradition and read the ones that tradition tells you to read.
Just kind of start somewhere, you mean? It
Start somewhere.
doesn't, even if it doesn't resonate with you, just start somewhere.
Yeah, I well the assumption I have, and it's part of my understanding of family systems and how we come to consciousness and awareness and self-understanding. Books like The Synaptic Self, The Developing Mind, and others. So you have to have, as you come to a version of yourself, you actually are enabled to have a different version of yourself. If you don't have a version of yourself, then you don't have a version of yourself. And so if you are inside of a tradition in which you say yes and you submit to some kind of discipline, people who get anxious about conservative or fundamentalist people, um, I understand that, because it seems as though they're hiding in a space that can't contain everything that's true. But in one sense, when we become solid, we become a self, then we can be curious and secure enough to look outside and journey. I like the metaphor of living in a hallway in which we're walking and progressing down the hallway, and we're making real progress, and others may be with us in the hallway. But until we get to the door at the end, all we can have is what's in the hallway. And then when you get to the door, it can be extremely anxiety producing to look outside the door in this big world and see all kinds of strange realities and strange people outside of it. And so you can stay in the reality of your hallway, and that would be all right, especially if you don't get outside of your hallway and cause harm. But you could also walk through the door and find out that you can also be yourself there. And when you're yourself there, you make a lot of different choices, and you come to understand yourself differently, because now you're in relationship to the world you're in differently, because it's a lot bigger, it's a lot more complex. And if you're a loving person in your smaller tradition, in your smaller reality within your tradition or whatever, when you go to the next bigger one, you take that loving, beautiful person to that next level and unfold. And when I changed my mind on some things, I was apologizing to my sons who had been argued with by me about some of the things I ended up agreeing with them on.
Mm.
And I told them, I said, I'm just really sorry it took me so long. I kind of came to that slow. And they said, well, don't worry about that, Dad. You were one of the nicest guys that thought like that we knew. You were at least nice
Uh-huh.
when you thought that way. But anyway, yeah. So if you don't have a place to start, I think you have to submit. In fact, one of the things I'm convinced of is that we have a dearth of elders, a dearth of people who are the sages and the holders of our stories and the interpreters of our stories in families and cultures. And so if you're not in a tradition that points you to an elder, to someone who can be that, then I think just start with one, maybe get to know some. In the recovery community, you visit a lot of meetings. You find a home meeting. Inside your home meeting, you find a sponsor who has a story you long to live into. And so you let them mentor you. Inside the Christian tradition, we have elders, we have leaders, we have models who guide us. And I remember the first time I heard a Thomas Merton quote, that was in the Seven Staircase or whatever. Anyway, his spiritual autobiography. But anyway, it's where he's in a city and he feels one with everybody in the city, and he just talks about the first time he felt one with everybody in the city. And I had to read Thomas Merton. I'm like, that, I know that, I remember that's happened. I'm gonna go read that guy. And of course, he became a mentor that I never met. And so, yeah, I would say choose choose a some beautiful person, some person that seems to emulate what you feel drawn towards. Let them help you. And if you don't have anybody, pick a tradition and start reading within that tradition. And one thing I discovered was when I started going toward the more mystical parts of my tradition, the mystics, and the people who pointed to universal compassion, and less around a deity that was tribal and local, and more around a divine reality that held everything and was in everything. Once I started reading those people and brought those people up in conversation, I found a lot of other people I could talk to and go with. They were just everywhere, and lo and behold, on the internet, you can end up in conversations and groups and just get mentored. And then I would say also, when you're at the end of that, and you're at the end of a bigger hallway, or you've walked out past the fence that was binding the yard outside your door, it's okay to go through the fence too. It's okay to say,
keep going, just keep going.
It's
How
all
far
right.
can you go?
Yeah, and I remember reading, let's see, it was Cosmos by Sagan, and then What a Brief History of Everything, or what, Hawkins' book. Anyway, and I was reading it and understanding maybe 20% of what I was reading, but I thought I wanted to know more of what I was reading. And when I got pushback from some of my religious tradition, I just walked outside the yard. And I went, well, if we're nervous about that, then we don't have everything in mind. We've only got a portion in mind. Because if you're going to do everything, you're going to look through every telescope you can find looking. You're going to look in microscopes. You're going to run theories and run formulas and figure it out, because there's nothing to be defended against in truth, and I think the essential purpose of humanity. So go chase it. And where is that? I think we all have it, and we've been convinced we don't, and that's the problem. So,
well, I love how you keep emphasizing that it's through the mentoring that whether it's through books or whether it's through people, it's like we need each other, and certainly we need our elders more than ever. And I think that was what was such a great gift for me, is that I didn't have connection with my grandparents when I was young, and so it was really when I was journeying with my mom that I got connected to my elders in my community, and got to appreciate all of that wisdom and the value that I needed so desperately and couldn't have found anywhere else.
Right.
And I hope that for anyone watching this video, if you're feeling like, maybe you don't have value, or you're feeling like maybe nobody is needing you,
Mhm.
that you can feel encouraged and
Absolutely.
try, and maybe it's go volunteer, or I don't know, visit a neighbor, or call me. Call me, write me, because I would love to talk with you. I
Right.
so I we definitely need to hear each other's stories, and um, we need to be reflected back to each other
Exactly.
in
That's
order
great.
to
That's
grow,
beautiful.
right?
That's really beautiful, and I do think it's important to hear what you're saying in terms of going ahead and living, going ahead and loving, going ahead and reaching out for help and to be help to others.
Yeah.
And I certainly have found clarity in my own journey by reaching out based on my own experience. Even Life Compass Living, came about because of what I wish I had in my 13 years as a caregiver for my parents and my wife's parents. I wish someone had come along and said, have these conversations, think about these things, put
Mhm.
these things in place, do it now. You're
Mhm.
right. You don't need all that now. You're right. You're funding things that may or may not happen later. Um, but lo and behold, here we are. Which is and and we can actually reduce our vulnerability and connect with our purpose that way.
So I'd like to just take a minute and have you share about Life Compass Living and about your book, anything that you would like to um, share about what you do and how you do it. It's such a unique service that you offer. So I'd love for people to understand how it is that you can help them.
Yeah, Life Compass Living, we say that we help people flourish in every stage of life and manage life transitions with elegance. So, like the beauty of your 8 keys is that if people want to really age well and own all the power they have in terms of their physical and emotional health and financial standing, all of that. I mean, that's the magic of the 8 keys. It's helping them do that. And
Mhm.
Life Compass Living, I wanted to develop a protocol that included the babies as well as those who are in the second half of life,
Mhm.
um, and to help us reconstruct our families of choice, because most people I know don't just relate to people they're related to. They relate
Absolutely.
to what I call a family of choice, which other people call that too. And so, how do we actually plan to reduce our vulnerabilities, secure our present lives and our futures in a way? And so, we say we do that process of flourishing in every stage of life and managing life transitions with elegance by following our life compass, which is person, people, and place. So we discover and live into the best version of ourselves as a person. We actually figure out who our family of choice is and make sure we share life with those folks the way we want to now and into the future. And
Mhm.
that we always have a place in that plan, that each has a place where our story, the story of our lives, and the contributions that we make through our lives are valued and expressed. Not just, you don't just get affection in the dream place you live, but you actually, you matter, you're significant, the people there value what you do, what you bring to the rest of the people in that place. So person, people, and place.
Mhm.
So I would say once we have what I call essential conversations and put plans in place, every day we get up really glad to be the person that we are with the people we are in the place we're living.
Mhm.
And when you're doing that, I call it life compass living. That's how you are living your life as life compass living. So
So how do people work with you? Like, what does it look like? Do you just sit with like a family and walk them through the process, or is it a group workshop, or?
well, it's the way it's going to work. Once the book's out, they'll be able to read the book to get the basic
Mm,
process in mind. But then we'll have online classes that people will be able to share by taking them together. So
okay.
they help them guide the way to have conversations, the things to decide, the things to put in
Mm,
place. And then they can meet with me and the people that I'm training as facilitators. Um, that will help them so that they only spend time on what they need to spend time on. The options are so diverse and complex and numerous that it's good to have someone say, well, with the family of choice you have, the things you need to pay attention to are these. And so it saves people a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of money to just move on to that. And we only work for the people that we're sitting with. We don't sell anything that we're pointing people to. And so we can really be counted on to help you form a plan. And so it's the book, online classes, facilitators.
And how much time does it generally take a family to go through the process, or at least to feel like they've maybe reached the first level of completion? I'm sure you can keep going through it over and over again, but how much time?
Yeah, well, I think if the time engaged with Life Compass Living, the time would take to read the book, to take the basic overall class, and to meet with your facilitator, it's probably somewhere less than 20 hours of like professional facilitated time, and then the time it takes you to read the book. But I've seen a lot of people who were just a couple who wanted to do the best they could to get a plan together, and they didn't want to work through it with everybody, but they wanted to have a plan. That's more like 4 to 8 hours of us getting clarity.
What if you're just an individual? Can you still do it just for yourself?
Absolutely, yeah. I call it parallel planning. So if you're walking along beside one another in life, and you know that when they have a crisis, you're going to go get involved. They might not want you involved right now because they're living their life, you're living yours. But if they fall down on the ground and can't get up, you're going to show up and help. So you need a plan, and you need a plan that acknowledges that commitment to them. I call it parallel planning. So even if you don't want to have conversations with everybody in your family of choice, and some people say get in each other's business. So if you don't want to get in each other's business, but if they fall out on the ground, you're going to be right in the middle of their business. So you might, I'm suggesting that you have a plan. I call it a parallel plan. And so you go along sharing life together, however long you choose to. But when something happens, as was the case with our parents, when it happens, you already know what you're going to do.
Yeah.
And you already know the limits it can invade your financial future. You know what it'll cost you relationally, what you're willing to pay relationally, whether you're willing to relocate or not relocate, whether they're, and then you can ask them directly, would you be willing to relocate? If not, you're going to stay there and I'm going to keep living here. The only thing you're getting across the way are these things, because we're not going to leave North Carolina or whatever.
Yeah.
And if you have that in place, then you know what to do. You can, I call it manage life transitions with elegance. So when that happens, you already know what to do, and it's elegant. By that I mean it's consistent with your life compass.
Yeah, it's those transitions that are the key.
Right.
Absolutely. It causes so much stress if we're not ready for it.
Yeah. One of the things I say in the book is I did not like feeling inadequate and overwhelmed and confused and ignorant of normal. It was normal. People get old.
Yeah.
People, end up dying, and that normal felt like an invasion. And I realized, we need to figure out how to let that feel more normal, so we can actually be with one another, love one another, support one another, without it being a huge crisis beyond the crisis that it is.
Yeah, it was the same for me. Like when we were going through it, I was like, I know that we're not the only people going through this.
Exactly.
Like, why do we not have a better system? Why is this so hard? Why are we recreating everything at every single decision point and every single, change? It's like, oh my goodness.
That's exactly right. That's the beauty of the 8 keys that you've got. I mean, it's a beautiful
I feel like mine is kind of like the entry point, like to get started, go here, and then you're like the meat and potatoes, like kind of bring it home and really look so at this rich and the relationships and help people, have those meaningful conversations, which are so important.
Well, and I think people who are going to be become self-aware, who are going to know themselves, and who are going to be who are capable of having the conversations. Whoever equips them with what to talk about and points them to the resources, more power to everybody.
Yeah, we definitely.
There's way more people in need of that than there are people trying to do it.
Yeah.
And you don't need to distrust the people who are selling you something. But I would suggest that you not act as if they know everything that's needed to be known to do the best thing for you. That the people that know that are the ones who share life and who understand the complexities of their life and what they actually want for the future. And it's not just a financial plan, and it's not just an estate plan. It is those things. It includes those things, but it's not just the things that end up being mostly about money.
Yeah, it's tricky because I do know there's so much. There can be a lot of distrust when people start to. Oh dear, I'm hearing an echo. I hope that hasn't been going on for very long. But when something is going to be sold, then it becomes like, oh. But unfortunately, not everything can be free, so we do have to find ways to value those things.
Right. Yeah. One of the clients I was with today was more surprised by how little it cost, because he's paid lawyers and other people huge amounts of money, and they get paid really well, and he said, "That's all?" Like, yeah.
Best deal out there. George
Fuller. He had some Well, he had some understanding of how better informed these other decisions were because of that. And so, but it is hard to choose to spend money in any way, especially for those who need to save it the most and really manage it well. The more you need to manage it well, the harder it is to spend it. And so I understand that for sure. Yeah.
See what they were expecting. So anyway, I think that is our cue, because I don't know why it was echoing so badly.
I haven't been hearing echo. Maybe it won't be on the live part.
Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you so much for joining, and this will be on the Facebook to replay, so as well. So.
Yeah. Well, keep up the good work, Beth. You're doing great stuff.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.